Okay, we are ready to begin. I want to welcome everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this discussion regarding ongoing efforts to improve water quality in Schoolhouse Ministers Pond. My name is Jane Crowley. I'm the health agent for the town of Eastham and the project manager for this restoration effort at Schoolhouse Ministers Pond. I just want to touch a little bit on the history of our efforts in terms of water quality in our ponds in the town of Eastham. Eastham has been monitoring water quality in many of our freshwater ponds for over 20 years. Much of this effort has been done with volunteers. Thank you to all of those who have helped and shown their commitment to our town. It's been my pleasure to work with you over these many years. This water quality data has helped define an action plan to improve the health of our ponds and to prioritize a list of the most impaired ponds. That work was done to create an action plan for our ponds more than 10 years ago. At that time, both Herring Pond and Great Pond were treated with alum. That was done in 2012 for Herring Pond, and Great Pond was treated with alum in 2013. Both of those projects were funded with CPA funds. Now, work is underway for Schoolhouse Ministers Pond, using multiple remediation approaches that will be discussed today. Several in-pond treatment strategies were conducted with Solitude Lake Management using CPA funds. Again, thank you for your commitment to these projects. Also, I would be remiss if I did not thank our DPW department, who also assisted with implementation of these projects. Again, many thanks. Now I want to look at the bigger picture. If you see the screen in front of you, you can see up in the very top of this screen is Schoolhouse Ministers Pond. This is a freshwater system that's located within this much larger watershed, which is Nauset Harbor Estuary Watershed. So as we work on this freshwater system, we are also, this project is even more important because this location is part of this very significant watershed system. Any improvements that we achieve in Schoolhouse Ministers Pond will eventually benefit the health of Salt Pond. Groundwater flow is generally moving in a southeasterly direction and discharges to Salt Pond. So the water is flowing from the top through Salt Pond and out into the Nauset Harbor estuarine system. So as we simultaneously work on additional approaches to improve water quality for Salt Pond, we hope that this freshwater remediation project will add to the sub-watershed success as a component of a comprehensive nutrient management initiative in a targeted sub-watershed. We can't attack the problem entirely at the same time. So this is an excellent starting point. And we hope that this sub-watershed proves to be an example of what a community can do to effectively improve the estuarine system. So today we're joined by consultants from APCC, April Wurst, and Gemma Kite from Horsley Witten. They will discuss water quality issues, past, present, and future efforts to improve water quality through nutrient reduction from stormwater treatment. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We welcome your input, your questions, your comments, and your commitment to assist in improving water quality in this very important freshwater system. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to April.
Thanks, Jane. That's a great introduction. So again, my name is April. I'm the restoration ecologist with the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. We work with towns and communities across the Cape to help them with improvement projects such as this. Today, I'm going to give you kind of an introduction for the project, a little bit on pond basics, review some of the problems specific to Schoolhouse Minister's Pond, and go into a little more detail about the work that the town has done to date. And then I'll introduce the topic of the day of planning for stormwater management, which is what APCC and Horsley Witten Group have been working with the town on since earlier on this year. We'll also pause at a couple different points for any comments and questions. So hold on to those and we'll have some time to address those as we go. So a brief introduction to ponds on Cape Cod. So there's about 1,000 lakes and ponds on the Cape. It's a huge number. Most of these are kettle ponds. They were formed from the glacial retreat and filled with groundwater where this depressions remained. We do have obviously some man-made ponds as well, where we've put in dams to hold back water. And then also salt ponds, which are joined to the sea. In Eastham, there are over 20 ponds of about 250 acres. Looking at Schoolhouse Minister's Pond, this is referred in different ways as one or multiple ponds. In technical terms, it's one pond separated by two basins. Minister Pond is the larger of the two, a little over 16 acres and 4.3 meters deep, or about 14 feet deep. Schoolhouse Pond, again, smaller, about 5.6 acres, and again, only about 14 feet deep. And again, these are both examples of those groundwater flooded kettle holes. So when you think about this for any pond on the Cape that's groundwater flooded, the surface level of the pond is the surface level of the groundwater surrounding by it. And it has influences from the groundwater flowing into that. One thing that's unique about this is a relatively shallow pond, but despite the shallow depths of less than 9 meters, it's actually a thermally stratified in the summer, which means that it has a separation where the top of the water gets warmer and the bottom is cooler. And that typically only happens in deeper ponds. That's interesting and useful to note, because when you go about managing a pond such as this, you want to kind of understand this system. So that's a really important piece. So what does that mean if it's stratified? So again, deep ponds or ponds like this, which are right on that groundwater lens, they're stratified. So that top layer called the epilimnion is where the light can penetrate. So it's much warmer. You also get the wind can help with mixing that surface water, and it's where you get what's called primary production. So again, think this is where all the plants and the algae live. And going back to kind of biology 101, those plants, those algae, they're photosynthesizing. They're taking up carbon dioxide and they're producing oxygen. So this top layer, it's warm, it's bright, and it's oxygen rich. And those plants and algae help take up nutrients. That's often why you get these big plant overgrowths of plant or algal blooms if you have too many nutrients in the system. And as you travel down, you have this kind of rapid temperature change, and then this thermocline beneath which is much colder, denser water. And then in that area is where you have decomposition. Dead material is decomposing, and that's the opposite process of photosynthesis. Again, it's the same processes of humans and animals breathing. Again, in that case, we're breathing in and taking up and using oxygen. So as a result, at the bottom, you have less oxygen, low oxygen, and sometimes really low oxygen, or what's called anoxic conditions, which is kind of a no oxygen condition. And that's particularly important because if you get those low oxygen or no oxygen conditions, then animals can't live there, fish and other organisms don't live if they don't have the oxygen. And then also those low oxygen conditions can make it easier for any nutrients that are living in the sediment at the bottom of the pond to be released. So that's an important piece to understand and kind of thinking about how to go about managing the ponds. So then this is just kind of what it looks like in the upper left in these stratified ponds again. And just in the summer, you get this warm layer that kind of mixes at the top, this cold layer at the bottom. And then in the spring and the fall, you get this overturning process. And again, that's typically why when you have a pond that has excess nutrients, you get algal blooms typically in the spring and the autumn when all those nutrients are kind of mixing throughout the pond. So looking at Schoolhouse Minister Pond, as Jane mentioned, there's been a lot of effort going into studying this, and a lot of this has come from volunteers helping to do monitoring both in coastal waters and also in the ponds, particularly in the past. So in 2008, there was a study by SMAS. This is a school out of University of Massachusetts. And they looked at 10 ponds that had been studied in Eastham with data collected from 2001 to 2006. This was part of the Barnstable County PALS, or Ponds and Lake Stewards program. Some of you may be able to give a wave. I'm sure some of you may have been involved with that in collecting that data. So that measured everything from temperature, DO or dissolved oxygen, looking at water clarity with Secchi depth, discs, alkalinity, chlorophyll A, which is really, again, a measure of algae, and then also nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, and then pH. One thing, again, that's just important to note for ponds. Ponds typically are, in the freshwater sense, are phosphorus limited. So when you have too much phosphorus, that's when you tend to have problems with too much plant and algae growth. Nitrogen, however, is also important to look at in freshwater ponds, because when you have too much phosphorus and too much nitrogen, the nitrogen kind of facilitates that extra growth that phosphorus allows for the plants and algae. More recently, as Jean mentioned, Solitude Lake Management was hired to do assessment of the pond's conditions since 2009, and they've been monitoring both vegetation and water quality. So this is the most word-dense slide we've got, but here's kind of a combination of some of those results from all of those studies. Looking at both those basins and the ponds, overall, there's poor water clarity. So this picture down here in the bottom right is a Secchi disc that gets lowered into the pond, and you look at how deep you can lower it and still see it. So at 4 feet, that would be no longer visible in a lot of these past studies. In both cases, they found high chlorophyll A. Again, that means lots of algae in the ponds. And looking at the nutrients, again, total phosphorus and total nitrogen both exceeded what was set out as the healthy pond threshold by that PALS, the Pond and Lake Stewardship Program. So we've got excess nutrients, lots of algae. So as a result, both of those ponds, according to that SMAS study, are classified as eutrophic. In terms of DO, or dissolved oxygen, there was less than 5 to 6 milligrams per liter measured in both, and that means that it's less than the state standard for supporting cold and warm water fisheries. So there's not enough oxygen in the water to support fish throughout the monitoring period. And again, as I mentioned before, because this is a thermally stratified system, at the very bottom, you can also get these anoxic conditions, which were measured in summer months in these ponds as well. So as a result of all of that, there's been kind of nuisance aquatic plant growth, particularly in those shallow areas between the two basins. And more recently, an identification of some Phragmites stands northeast of the Minister Pond. So the town has gone about getting funding to do this kind of comprehensive multi-step approach. First, treatment of the Phragmites, then dealing with some of these other issues that were mentioned, the excess plants, dealing with the dissolved oxygen, and then the source of that. So I'm going to kind of run through these. Here you can see the stand of Phragmites after it was treated, one of those stands. This was a targeted treatment that was done last year. It was quite effective. Here you can see the plants very dead after that treatment. The next step was to deal with the aquatic plant excess aquatic plants and the low dissolved oxygen. So the aquatic plants were dealt with a hydro rake. This was done last fall in October. Some of you may have seen this out there or seen some clips of this. This is an example of what a hydro rake looks like. Essentially, it's like a small backhoe on a floating barge. And we've got 2 short videos. I'm going to show you clips of these that kind of give you a sense of what that looks like in action. So I'm just going to switch over to our videos here.
The goal of the program is to maintain a balanced level of water lilies in addition to other nuisance aquatic plants, improve open water habitat, and promote growth of less invasive plant species. At the same time, providing access for recreational activities. Primarily, aquatic plant control will be achieved through this first phase, hydro raking. Solitude Lake Management was contracted to conduct this effort. This work was performed in conjunction with our DPW department.
So here in this image, you can see that those water lilies, the excess plants there, and then this is the hydro rake, again, working, able to reach down to the bottom of the pond in those shallow areas, pull up the rooted system and some of the excess sediment that's been building up in that area. And again, that was a very targeted effort just between those two basins. And again, because it's relatively shallow there, this is a pretty effective means of getting at that. I'm just going to switch to the next. So that was the first step. And then the second piece that was worked on this spring in April, the town hired Solitude Lake Management to help deal with the low dissolved oxygen. So again, I'm just going to show a short clip of this video as well, so you can see what that aeration looks like.
I'm here with Mike Didier from Solitude Lake Management, and he's going to describe what we're doing at Schoolhouse Ministers Pond. Mike?
Yep. So right now we're installing a large lake aeration system. We're putting 10 diffuser heads out in the lake, evenly spread. It's going to provide the right amount of oxygen to raise the oxygen levels from the bottom of the pond all the way up to the top. This will reduce algae counts as well as reducing the amount of organic matter buildup, all in the long term helping the pond aesthetics as well as the ecological value. And then outside of this, we're looking to potentially do a third phase with an alum treatment. We'll reduce the amount of phosphorus in the lake and go from there.
Great, thank you.
So again, here you can see they've set up, it's a compressor that's along the side of the pond near the school. It attaches 10 hoses, weighted hoses that go along the bottom of the pond to those 10 diffuser heads. You saw him lifting one of them out onto the boat. And again, if you're out on the ponds now, you may see some bubbles. So this is that aeration. So again, it's allowing mixing of the water so that you don't have those low oxygen conditions, adding more oxygen to the water and also mixing it throughout. So those are kind of the first two steps that the town has taken to address some of these issues. And they're important steps to kind of address the near-term problems in terms of excess aquatic plants. So again, dealing with the invasive species while it was a small stand, using the hydro raking to remove some of the plants, aeration, increasing dissolved oxygen. And again, if you remember, at the beginning, I said when you have stratified, if you have low oxygen conditions, that can actually allow for release of nutrients. When you increase the oxygen at that lower level, that can, if you have excess nutrients in that soil, help stabilize and hold them in there. The next step that was mentioned in that video is possible alum treatment. So alum can be put in, and that binds with any phosphorus and activates it, and it then sinks down and sits in the soil. So again, if the aeration isn't enough, there's not enough oxygen to kind of stabilize that, or you have phosphorus kind of within the water itself, again, that's another way that you can get rid of some more. And then the last piece, again, which I want to introduce is the stormwater management. So this is what APCC and Horsley Witten have been working with the town on. And this is an important piece, kind of looking at long-term. So we address many of these short-term actions that can help improve the water quality. Now long-term, let's look at source reduction. That's eliminating nutrients and other pollutants. So with that early 2008 SMAS study, they didn't do a full comprehensive watershed look, but they were able to kind of estimate the phosphorus budget, looking at how much phosphorus is coming in and kind of what are the main sources of that. So in Minister's Pond, the roadways, off from roadways, is the kind of biggest source that they identified. Roughly 30 to 60% of the phosphorus in that pond basin is coming from roads. The second from septic, as there's some houses right along the edge of that. Schoolhouse Pond, roadways again was pretty significant. It was secondary, 18 to 34% of the phosphorus budget they estimate is coming from roads, with a larger portion from bird excrement. So that's pretty important again to understand. That's a significant source. So again, that's why stormwater is a good, addressing pollution coming in with stormwater is a good approach. So with that, we've been looking at two sites. One here is town-owned at Fisherman's Landing, coming down next to the school, to Schoolhouse Pond here. And then the second site is looking at runoff from this large section of Route 6. Again, this is a state-owned route. And currently the water has been going through storm drains and being piped into Minister's Pond. Again, this is a significant amount of roadway and source of pollution. So I just want to kind of introduce what stormwater is briefly. So I'm going to show one other short video that talks about what stormwater is and why it's a problem. And then we will get into the specifics of this project.
When raindrops fall from the sky, trees and plants help break their fall. In the woods, rain is gently guided to the ground below, where plant roots and microorganisms drink it in. Here, impurities in the rain are filtered out. Rainwater, not absorbed by the plants, continues to seep into the ground, restoring groundwater and filling lakes, ponds, and streams. The Cape's groundwater, the same water we drink, depends on rain and snowmelt for its replenishment. Roofs, driveways, roadways, and parking lots are not so welcoming. The rain washes these hardened surfaces of dirt particles from air pollution, fertilizers, oil and gas from cars, litter, and pet waste. And with no place to soak in, the rainwater gathers in puddles or speeds down the road, taking the pollution with it. Flowing from our streets into our coastal waterways, this is where rainwater becomes stormwater. But water is a resource we can't afford to waste. Understanding this, we can use new ways to handle stormwater, and where we can, let the raindrops soak in where they fall.
I think that's the really important piece. Again, stormwater is any rain or snow melt that's coming off of hardened surface. Typically, we're thinking about roadways, but anything else that's a hard surface. And when it does that, like pollution, and that includes things like nutrients and bacteria. So, typically what's been done, traditional stormwater management, you are trying to clear the roadways of that rain. It goes into these storm drains, and we generally think, okay, it's gone. Where did it go? In some cases, it's been set up to just pipe it off the roadways and go straight into our waterways. In other cases, we have this kind of structure as shown here beneath it called a catch basin. And this is a system that allows you to remove any garbage, oil and grease, and then any heavy sediment material will sink to the bottom, and that captures that sediment and some bacteria with it. But nutrients are not being addressed with this traditional management process. So with this project and many others now, we're looking at an alternative, which is called green infrastructure, using plants and the soil media to help improve the pollutant removal with our stormwater treatment. So by adding plants and specific soil media, you can really get at not just the garbage and the oil and grease and the sediment and bacteria, but also nutrients and do it more effectively. So that's really the approach that we're looking at with this, is going beyond the traditional, which really focuses on pre-treatment and just getting the water off the roadway, to really removing those nutrients so we can improve the water quality. So this is kind of the overview of the project we've been working on. We started off early this year with some planning. In the spring, Horsley Witten went out and did a site assessment around Schoolhouse Minister Pond and those two areas I pointed out on the map, and developed several concept designs that were reviewed by the project team. In May and June for Fisherman's Landing, that included development of what's called 75% designs to be applied for permit applications with the Conservation Commission. And for the Route 6 location, which is actually, again, state-owned, we looked at several different options at a kind of more concept level design. And so today, Horsley Witten, Gemma, and Rich Clater are both going to review those options that we've developed so far with you guys. And again, the next step is going to be kind of the permit review for Fisherman's Landing. The end goal of this is that for that Fisherman's Landing site, which is owned by the town, that will finish up design, and then the town will be able to construct the system design for that. And then here, again, Route 6 is such a big contribution to Minister's Pond. We want to kind of end with some revised concept designs that the town and the team can then take to the owners of that property where we're looking at. So DOT, the Department of Transportation, or in the case of one of the locations, looking at the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So with that, I'm just going to pause briefly and see if there's any questions about some of the work that's been done to date, or kind of the introduction to the project. We'll go into much more detail on the stormwater in a minute if there are not any questions. So feel free, you can unmute yourself if you have a question.
April, there is one question that came in through the chat box, and that is, will this presentation recording be posted somewhere after today? And I had preemptively answered that it is being recorded and will be made available after today. Mike maybe can chime in a little bit later to let us know where that will be posted.
Great question.
Yeah, and if I can add, we're also going to add both of the presentations by April from APCC and from Gemma from Horsley Witten on our website as well. So that material is available if you want to read it more thoroughly.
All right, great. Well, I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gemma to give you more detail about the stormwater piece of the work, the project.
Great. Hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yeah.
Thank you, April and Jane, for the project introduction. I really like that Stormwater 101 video. I think it gives a really good overview of the issue and what we're trying to solve here. My name is Gemma Kite. I'm a senior environmental engineer with the Horsley Witten Group. And today I'm also co-presenting with Rich Clater. He is the president of Horsley Witten Group and an engineer. Horsley Witten Group is an engineering consulting firm based out of Sandwich, Massachusetts. And we've been supporting the town of Eastham with designing the stormwater management improvements to the Schoolhouse Minister Pond. So today we're going to present some of our proposed ideas for managing the stormwater to improve the pond water quality. So when we first started this project, we conducted an evaluation of the watershed to the Schoolhouse Minister Pond to identify potential site locations for stormwater management. We took into consideration site limitations and constraints like available space, soil properties, groundwater elevation, and whether the site was privately or publicly owned. And then we also took into consideration the amount of stormwater that the site could capture. So this project is all about improving the pond water quality. So we want to target the areas where you can capture the most amount of stormwater and prevent it from getting into the pond. So this map here shows the watershed area for the Schoolhouse Minister Pond. This red bold outline is the watershed area. And some of you may be asking, what is a watershed? It's an area of land where all the water flowing underneath the ground and all of the water flowing or draining on top of the ground goes to the same water body. So in this case, it's the Schoolhouse Minister Pond. So this whole watershed area here that you see outlined in red is approximately 76 acres. And 11 acres, or approximately 14% of the total watershed, is impervious cover. And as we learned through that video, the impervious cover is hard surfaces such as driveways, roads, parking lots, and rooftops. And I think the video did a good job of sharing why we care so much about impervious cover. The main reason is that stormwater runoff from hard surfaces can carry with it petroleum products, oils, sediment, chemicals, fertilizers, nutrients, and other harmful products directly into the pond and impair water quality. So when we are designing for stormwater management, we really want to target as much impervious cover as possible so we can reduce the amount of stormwater pollution entering into the water body. So when we looked at the watershed, and as April pointed out, we saw right away that this Route 6 area, which is predominantly impervious cover, is directly discharging without treatment into this existing drainage pipe directly into the pond. So we knew that this was an important area to target our work along the Route 6 corridor. And then with the town, they had already pre-identified Fisherman's Landing as a site of interest. So together with the town, with Jane and Silvio from DPW, we identified 3 potential sites for stormwater improvements. And I'm going to talk about them in order of how they're numbered here. So the first one is Fisherman's Landing. Most of you may be aware that this is a very informal boat landing. People can park a few cars here, launch their kayaks, canoes, paddleboards, go fishing. There's also a little trail that starts right at this parking lot. It's located next to the elementary school. The second site that we're going to talk about is off the rail trail down here. And the third site that we're going to talk about is at the Nauset Haven condos. So we're going to talk about all of these three sites in a little bit more detail throughout this presentation. But I just want to make an important note up front that at this time, only site one, which is Fisherman's Landing, is going to move forward to construction. The other two sites, number 2 and number 3, are just in the planning stages at this time. Prior to advancing these sites to construction, there are quite a few steps that need to happen that we will discuss today. So before I move into talking in more detail about each site, I'm just going to pause here and see if Rich wants to add anything or if there are any questions.
Gemma, Cheryl Schwartz has a question.
Sure. Is it in the chat box or can we unmute?
Cheryl, I see your hand is raised. Cheryl, did you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't know if my question may have been answered already, but going back to the initial phases at the 2 ponds, I was just wondering, has there been improvement and how much at the ponds? Or is it too early to tell?
I guess I could take that. We do continually monitor the ponds for water quality. I think it's too early to tell. So
Okay.
we're trying all we can, and ponds are subject to so many variables beyond our control, including temperature and rainfall and wind action and so forth. So every season is a little bit different, and that's why ponds are so challenging. However, part of this work effort is continuing to monitor over a long period of time. So I guess the jury is still out.
Yeah. What's considered a long period of time? 5 to 10 years, possibly?
Well, we have, as stated up front, volunteers have been assisting with monitoring many of our freshwater ponds for 20 years. So it's really critical that as the scientists and to really look at trends over time, that we continue to collect this information. And it's very valuable, even if you can't act on it today, that you have that historic information so that it can create a clear path for you and give you information to establish priorities like we did with the action.
Sure. And that was, and thank you. I don't know, I just one more quick question related to what you just said. I was wondering, because I have a cottage on a small kettle pond, how are the ponds chosen to be tested? How often are they tested? And are all the ponds consistently tested by these volunteers over the course of a year, let's say?
Maybe if you wouldn't mind, maybe I will pass those questions, hold those questions to the end, and I will let Gemma continue with her presentation, because those are all really important questions. But just to get to the heart of the stormwater presentation, if that would be okay with you, Cheryl?
That's fine. That's fine.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gemma, the only thing I would add to your presentation, and you mentioned the 3 sites we're going to focus on today, in our assessment, we did look at several other locations. We're trying to see any opportunity in this watershed to manage the stormwater. So we looked at several others, and these are the finalists, I think is the best way to put it. And so we're focusing on them because they offer the best benefits in relation to pollutant management and area captured.
Yes, that's a great addition. Thanks, Rich. So moving forward, so for
Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or you can log on to userclients.com.
Okay. All right, so moving forward, so for each site, we have calculated approximately how much impervious cover out of the total impervious cover for the watershed is managed by each site. So for site 1 at Fisherman's Landing, this practice, a stormwater management practice here, would manage about 1% of the total impervious cover for the watershed. And you may be looking at that and saying, oh, that's not a whole lot. But while this isn't a large amount of impervious cover treated, we feel that there are a lot of other benefits to this site that make it a priority for us to move forward with. So what are we proposing here at Fisherman's Landing? The stormwater retrofit or practice is what we would call it, that we're proposing is a wet swale. A wet swale is a vegetated open channel, and it's located here in this blue outline. And due to how close the groundwater is, the wet swale will have a very smaller portion of it that has sort of a permanent water pool in it. Wet swales rely on sedimentation, adsorption, microbial breakdown to help remove the pollutants from the stormwater. And the best way to put it is they mimic the treatment properties of a natural wetland. So we kind of like to think of it as sort of a swale / wetland. An overflow spillway, which is located here, will help direct any excess runoff into the pond. And we have designed it with a sediment forebay made of plantable concrete pavers. And this will help trap any sediments or debris before the stormwater runoff enters into the wet swale. A couple things to note with this design is that there was or is currently a pedestrian path. The entrance is probably located somewhere where we're proposing to put the wet swale. So with this, we are going to relocate the entrance to that path and then reconnect it to the current existing path further on in the woods. We would propose a fence here, which would help separate and keep folks out of the wet swale. On one side would be the fence, and then a retaining wall on the other side. And this will help sort of formalize that entrance to the pedestrian path. We are also proposing to repave and regrade the lower part of this parking lot here, which will help direct stormwater runoff coming down Park Street, Fisherman's Landing Road into our wet swale. So just an overview of some of the benefits that this provides, and again, some of the site changes that we're proposing here. So currently runoff from the Park Street Fisherman's Landing Road runs overland and discharges into the pond. The wet swale that we're proposing to put here will provide treatment of the stormwater before it discharges to the pond. There's also currently some ponding of water that happens, and you can see this in these two photos. You'll probably notice them after a large storm event, and sometimes they take a few days to dry up. So again, the location of this wet swale, the regrading, repavement of this parking area, we're going to help direct all of that stormwater runoff into the wet swale and eliminate this ponding of water. We recognize that Fisherman's Landing is a well-used, well-loved place by residents and visitors alike. During our visits out there to conduct field work, we saw how much this area is used, and we want to make sure that our design preserves the character of the site and allows people to use it in the same way. So you'll see that our design is sort of off from the parking area. It allows still for people to park there, get into the water, use their boats, fish from the edge if they would like to. And we are looking to preserve some of the larger trees in the area to, again, keep that aesthetic character of the site. So the site changes include, like I mentioned, sort of establishment of 3 parking spaces. They probably won't be striped, but there will be some curb stops there to make it slightly more formal than how the parking is currently laid out. Again, the pedestrian path will be slightly relocated, but it will be connected to the existing path further into the woods. There'll be a fence and a retaining wall. This will, again, help to establish a more formal entrance to the pedestrian path. And then public signage will be important, not only to help educate residents and visitors on the importance and the function of the wet swale, but also to highlight all of the other great important work that the town is doing to improve the water quality in the pond. So what does a wet swale look like? I'm going to turn it over to Rich, who has a lot more experience designing and implementing these to talk through what do these wet swales look like.
Thanks, Gemma. Just a couple of photographs here. We have a few examples to show you what we're talking about. This project was constructed about 5, maybe 6 years ago up in Harvard, Mass, north and west of Boston, off of 495. And the photo on the left is really right after the facility was built and the plants had just been planted. And the water that you see is very shallow. It's really only a few inches deep, but it's about at the same elevation as the pond in the background. You can just see the pond in the background on the left, and that's Bear Hill Pond. And so that water elevation is groundwater. As April mentioned earlier, this pond in Harvard is a dammed pond, but it is controlling the groundwater. And then just after a few years, those wetland plants grow in remarkably quickly, and they really they love the water. Number one, and then number two, they grow up pretty big and then hide that water. And then so things like concerns that you might have in terms of getting into the water or mosquitoes or other things are pretty much eliminated by the vegetation. It's not good habitat for mosquito larvae. It's good habitat for frogs and other critters that eat mosquito larvae. And so they work very, very well. And they're pretty safe too, because you get this vegetation that grows up around them. And here's another one we did just 3 years ago. And this one was done over in Roger Williams Park in Providence. And this facility also is next to Polo Lake in Providence in Roger Williams Park. And again, sited at the same elevation as the lake, which you can't really see here, but it's off to the right in both photos. And again, in the left photo, it's they're actually putting the plants in here. This was done by volunteers, and you can actually see the algae growing on top of that pond. That's very typical. We use a lot of fertilizer to stabilize the ground right after construction, and their plants aren't growing, and so you'll see algae typically growing these. But then, just again, after a few years, the vegetation takes off, and then that vegetation takes up a lot of those nutrients, and so you very rarely will see algae in these things after a few years. So just some of the important things Gemma pointed out in the design is first of all maintenance. In this case, the town will be maintaining this facility, and what that includes is inspecting and cleaning out the sediment forebay. The photo in the center here is a similar type of photo of a forebay that we'll be using. This uses this paver product and a little weir, and the sediment comes into that forebay, drops out, and then it's very easy to just shovel out and remove and take care of. So that will be done typically once a year, maybe twice a year, depending on the load, because the Park Street is sort of paved and there's a lot of load coming down there. We expect it might be a little more often to begin with. And the other maintenance is just to make sure that there isn't any erosion around the sides of these things. And if there is, you fix it. And then any kind of trash and debris that's in the swale can be removed. So it's pretty low maintenance once you manage the sediment. Next slide. And then Gemma mentioned this. We're really close to the school, the elementary school, number one. We are on town-owned property, so the town doesn't need an easement or permission to do this. We are getting ready to go to conservation for a hearing next week. So the applications have been submitted. And assuming all goes well, we will have construction-ready plans later this year and into early fall, and hopefully we'll build this beginning in as early as October. And then I think what's really important is this photo here shows an outdoor classroom for the elementary school that is really right down that path that Gemma mentioned from the facility. So this, with the signage and with what we're doing there, will offer an opportunity to add to the curriculum of the elementary school and expand that outdoor classroom.
Great. Before we move on to site 2, are there any questions or comments on this Fisherman's Landing site?
I did just see someone in the chat offered that question.
How noisy is this project?
Yeah, you mean like building it, or noisy afterwards?
During.
Yeah, so this is a small project. It will involve some heavy equipment and maybe some excavation removal of some of that soil that we're going to dig it down. There's a couple of trees that are going to be cut down, so there'll be some noise associated with that, but it's very short-lived. It literally can. This project can be built in a matter of days. Ultimately, when we go to pave it, there's some noise and some disruption in doing the paving too. But pretty quick project, and I wouldn't say anything unusual in terms of building this. Once it's built, it's going to be a nice, quiet, serene place. Maybe we'll have a little more wildlife noise as we get into the future.
Not see any other questions.
Okay, we'll move on to site 2. So site 2 is one of the 2 sites that is proposed to help manage the runoff from Route 6. And site 2 is located along the rail trail. So some of you who live in Eastham may be very familiar with the site, and we'll share some pictures in a minute. We calculated the drainage area that would be managed and captured by this practice here, and the impervious cover portion of that is about 13% of the total watershed impervious cover. So we're getting a little bit more captured here with this practice as opposed to number 1. And again, we think this site offers a lot of great benefits. So what are we proposing here? We're calling this the Rail Trail Rain Garden. We're proposing a rain garden and a leaching catch basin here. A rain garden is a landscaped shallow depression that allows stormwater to seep into the ground. It uses plants, soils, microbes to help treat the stormwater as the stormwater infiltrates into the ground. So here we have in this nice green shade sort of a proposed location for where this rain garden would go. We have an overflow hood here shown that would direct any excess runoff into a leaching catch basin that would be underground. So it's obviously not a surface item, so it's not shown here, but basically it would be underneath this overflow hood. There is an existing nearby leaching catch basin. This is the manhole cover to it here. So we could connect the proposed leaching catch basin with the existing one to be able to provide ample storage for any stormwater events. And again, a sediment forebay here will help to catch any sediments, debris prior to the stormwater entering the rain garden. We like this design because it takes advantage of both surface, the rain garden, and subsurface, the leaching catch basin components. This is a completely offline practice, meaning that the stormwater runoff is captured here and it will not discharge into the pond. So it's bringing that stormwater completely offline. Therefore, we are reducing the amount of stormwater that will enter the pond and obviously the amount of pollution entering the pond. This practice will also connect into an existing structure and make use of that, which is a good benefit. And it provides a great educational opportunity. I can see already a lot of cyclists and pedestrians going by this site saying, oh, what is that? Let's read about it. This would be a great site for an educational sign here as well. So again, I'm going to turn it over to Rich, and he's going to share some example rain gardens that we've designed and implemented.
So here are two examples, one on the Cape at Osterville Library that we did with April and APCC just a couple of years ago. This was right after the planting. And then a project up in Hingham a few years ago where we did a training with local residents, and that they actually did the installation. So that's a nice opportunity for a rain garden, is you can have a backhoe or a small excavator dig the hole out, and then have local volunteers do the actual planting. The one in Osterville on the left collects a rooftop runoff off the library, and you can see this young girl sitting there watching the runoff coming in. We actually used a hose that would drain off the roof, and we could fill it up, and we watered the plants that way. And the rain garden, just as the name says, is a really great way to both treat the stormwater and meet those objectives, but also you could plant it with a range of plants depending on whether you're in a shady spot or a sunny spot. And the stormwater actually waters the garden, so you typically need a lot less watering, and we don't really water them. Next slide. Here's another example. This is a Sandwich Public Library. This one is a little bit more involved because it was a new construction, and it involved collecting runoff from the parking lot. But again, it shows some of the elements, the planting. This photo on the right shows the water in it after a rain event, and you would really only expect a couple of inches of water to pond up when it's raining real hard. If we get a big storm, it'll flow over into that catch base, that little dome that you see in the background there that the arrow is pointing at. That would be just during major storms. And then if it doesn't overtop that, it just filters into the ground and disappears, typically within a day's time. Okay, next one. So some of the maintenance here, the DCR who owns this property or the town would ultimately be maintaining this facility. You would inspect it and remove trash when you see it. And then really the rest of the maintenance is all about keeping the vegetation in order. Sometimes you need to prune or remove dead vegetation. Some places, these facilities are adopted by local volunteers, and they keep the weeds out. The leaching catch basins that these overflow into typically just need to be inspected to make sure that they're still functioning, and if there's any debris in them, you clean that out. There's already one leaching catch basin in this location, so DCR is familiar with these, and so adding another in the rain garden would be a pretty straightforward maintenance operation for that. And I think I saw a question in the chat, so maybe I'll just answer that while I'm going here. The runoff that would come to this is not just the path, but we would pick up the drainage from the highway itself. So there would be a diversion pipe that picks up the runoff off of Route 6 and then carries it off into this path. Because the rail trail is lower there, because there's an underpass, it's a really ideal location to collect this runoff. So, and then just to conclude, a key consideration here is DCR is going to need to ultimately agree to do this and sign off on that. So we will be working with them. As Gemma mentioned, we're in the preliminary design stages. So we have to advance these at least to a certain level before we talk with them about permission and then ultimately maintenance. And then again, this would be a great location for educational signage for all the passers-by to see what we're doing there.
Rich, we got another question in the chat box. What will the effect be on the pond vegetation? Will this mitigate the excessive growth of lily pads?
Yeah, I mean, what this will do is eliminate the nutrients.
Rich, we just lost your sound, I think.
Rich, we can't hear you, but I can help answer this question. So all of the 3 sites that we're talking about today, all of them are to reduce the nutrient load into the pond, into the Minister Schoolhouse Pond complex. So yeah, the more we can reduce the nutrients, the more it will help reduce the excessive growth of vegetation in the pond. And for this particular site, the rain garden here that we're proposing at the rail trail, all of the stormwater that's captured off of Route 6 and directed into this rain garden would no longer be going to the pond anyways. So that would be a whole chunk of stormwater runoff that would be completely eliminated as an input into the pond.
Let's just take this one last question before we move on. I know we started just a couple minutes late, but we're getting closer to 3:30. The last question here: how favorable has the DCR been to projects like this in the past? Rich, I think you've mentioned you've worked with DCR on some. Yep, we can hear you. Okay, good. I don't know what happened to my microphone. I might have unplugged it. I'm back online. So DCR, is the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and they are doing more and more of this green infrastructure. The question here will be, will they be able to add to their maintenance burden, and are they willing to do that? So, the next step on something like this would be to complete the 25% design and get it advanced, and then meet with them and say, okay, what is your willingness and ability to maintain it more infrastructure? And if they're game for that, then that's one thing. And then if they're not, then perhaps the town can absorb some of these maintenance costs and maintenance burden.
There is a question about if we have any advice for homeowners trying to do similar plantings on their own property. I'm going to just leave that for the end. If we have time, we'll get back to that question if that's okay. But that's a great question. Okay, so the last site that we want to talk about today is Site 3, which is at the Nauset Haven condos. Again, this is off the route. This is going to be managing the Route 6 drainage. So I'm going to show sort of my cursor of where the area, contributing area would be. So it's sort of right to the right of that 2 on Route 6, all the way to the end, to the other side of this boundary. So it's quite a bit of road, and just given that it's predominantly impervious cover, it's a lot of pollutant load as well. So we calculated that the impervious cover treated by a stormwater practice here at Site 3 is approximately 25% of the total impervious cover of this watershed, which is quite a bit. So what are we proposing to do here? We're proposing a infiltration basin. An infiltration basin is an open depression that infiltrates stormwater into the underlying soils. It is sized to drain all stormwater that's directed into it in 24 hours or less. And the basin will be planted with grasses, wildflowers, and shrubs, so it's not going to be just a basin full of rocks. For this particular design, what we're proposing is a diversion manhole would be placed along the existing drainage pipe that discharges to Minister Schoolhouse Pond. This diversion pipe would be sized so that it only diverts so much stormwater that can be handled by this infiltration basin. Storm events that produce a lot more runoff than what this infiltration basin can be designed to handle will be still discharged through this existing drainage pipe. The diversion manhole will also have a deep sump to help capture sediments and debris before it discharges into the basin. And there is a sediment forebay again here to help also capture sediments before it enters into the infiltration basin. We have designed an overflow spillway, which is located sort of on this side of the basin, and that would be to divert any excess stormwater overland. Again, we designed this and in a way that does not anticipate any overflow happening. Finally, we show maintenance access. So it's going to be important for whoever is maintaining this in the end, which we'll talk about in a minute, to be able to access it, to get to the sediment forebay, to get to this diversion manhole, to be able to inspect the infiltration basin. So there will be some maintenance access in order to do that. What we like about this practice is that it treats the largest volume of stormwater and the most amount of impervious cover for all of the options that we've discussed. It is an offline practice, so again, stormwater that's directed into the infiltration basin will not be discharging into the pond, and it is designed to drain in 24 hours. Because of the proximity to the Nauset Haven condo units, we have designed this to be able to preserve as best as possible the character of the site. So we do intend to leave in as many of the large trees as possible to provide a visual barrier to the stormwater basin. And again, changes to the site include you're going to have this basin. It will be located near your existing leach fields. We will preserve as many large trees as possible, and including site access for maintenance. So this is what your current view looks like for those of you who may rent or own a unit at the Nauset Haven condos. If you step outside one of your units, you probably are used to seeing this. Your sort of sewer leach field, septic leach field is located behind this fence. And then you've got this nice vegetated area here full of ivy and large trees. And what you could potentially see in the future if this infiltration basin were to move forward is this. And just keep in mind that this is an artist's rendering or illustration of the infiltration basin. So it doesn't necessarily depict the exact design that it's going to be. But it is meant to show you what this could potentially look like once the vegetation has grown in. And again, just a reminder, very much still at the planning phases of this. There's a lot of steps that need to happen in order for this practice to go on to construction, which we'll talk about in a minute. So Rich, I'll hand it back over to you to talk through some of the infiltration basin examples.
Yeah, just a couple of pictures here, and two very different settings. One is at the Barnstable Municipal Airport in Hyannis, and this is on the left, and this basin is picking up runoff off of the tarmac of the runway, and you can see it's planted with some shrubs and just some grass. And I would say this is a little bit more of an industrial look than what we would expect. But a more, maybe a similar type of practice is over here on the right. This is a residential housing project in Bourne. And this is kind of what you would expect to see in this, perhaps with some bigger trees and some of the trees that the rendering showed. But this shows the forebay in the front. Those big rocks would be sort of the area where the sediment would be settle out, and then it can be planted with shrubs and really just a turf grass in the bottom. You'll notice this picture was taken in the early spring, and we sometimes see a little bit of sediment build up. We think our facility here with our pre-treatment with the catch basin, the deep sump that Gemma mentioned, and the forebay would keep that down. So next slide. So maintenance on this, our expectation is the DOT would maintain the sediment forebay and maintain the diversion structure, because this is their runoff off of their highway. That involves inspection twice a year, mowing the berm, and cleaning out those pre-treatment devices. We expect the easiest way to get to this would be through the condominium access driveway and access to the existing houses and residences. And then our expectation would be maintenance would be done in the fall and maybe early winter, early spring. And then We could, depending on the condo ownership, we sometimes see aesthetic maintenance, maybe the mowing, maybe the pruning of the vegetation done by the local residents, and then the more heavy maintenance of removing sediment or fixing any kind of erosion would be done by the DOT. So just some options for ultimate maintenance. Next slide. And then again, some key considerations is we certainly need the approval and the coordination with the property ownership. This is on private property, so there'd be some kind of an arrangement or agreement between the DOT and the condo association to allow this to be done here. We would definitely build this in the off season. And then the expectation is it takes a little bit of time to get that image that Gemma showed of the future view. Typically about a year for the vegetation to establish. Okay, next.
So just to wrap up, and then we'll take questions or comments. So to summarize, we've identified 3 potential sites to help manage stormwater inputs into the ponds. And if we total all of the impervious cover treated by the 3 practices, we're looking at a total of 39% of the total impervious cover treated by the 3, if all 3 were to go to construction and be implemented. The remaining large amounts of impervious cover still left to manage include the elementary school, some of the large parking lots associated with the church here. And really the rest of the impervious cover is sort of your residential houses, driveways, and some of these smaller roads. So, if we did implement all 3 of these projects, it would go a long way to help improve water quality in the ponds.
Great. So are there any specific questions, particularly about that last site that we addressed before we go to the general questions? I think one important thing, again, to note just about the last 2 sites from the Route 6 runoff, again, that's a state-owned road, so obviously there's going to be coordination with the Department of Transportation and maybe for the bike trail as well with DCR since they own that site there. But I think it's really valuable that the town is looking at this because, again, the impact is happening to the pond and downstream in the coastal water. So being able to get these kind of early designs to be able to discuss more thoroughly with the state how to address this is really a key piece because the runoff from Route 6 is a pretty significant part of what's going into the pond from stormwater. Any other questions about those sites?
I have a question. Hi. This is Francie Williamson. Could you just repeat what I missed what Rich was saying about who was responsible for the maintenance of the Nauset Haven site?
Yeah, I think that the short answer is the DOT. The intention is for the town to approach a Mass DOT who maintains and operates the drainage system, which is the pipe that collects the runoff off the road and then it discharges to the pond. They have an easement to do that. And they are charged with managing their own runoff and drainage. And if we put in a treatment device to do that, the expectation is that they would be responsible for maintaining the facility. Now, their idea of maintenance might be different than people living there in terms of aesthetics. So what you often see in a place like this is the DOT is responsible for cleaning out the structures of the sediment that builds up or the sediment that might be into our forebay, and they would come in once a year or once every other year and clean that out. But the grass won't get mowed or the vegetation may not get pruned or replaced if it died. So oftentimes you'll see the people that live in next to one of these facilities would maintain what we call the aesthetic maintenance. So maybe mowing and maybe pruning or weeding and that kind of thing. So there would have to be an agreement between the DOT, the town, and the condominium owners for that kind of a approach to move forward.
So I have one more question. Is there a price tag put on all three projects? I mean, I know the prices are going to, the cost is apparently meant to be shared among different entities, but was there a total cost estimate or no?
We don't have detailed cost estimates yet for the two 25% designs as we're still advancing those. We will have a cost for that. The Fisherman's Landing cost, we have a material cost, and then the town is going to be building that, but with town personnel. So it'll be a significantly less expensive than it would otherwise if you're going through a bidding process.
Yes, and if I can address the some of the budget issues. So many of, almost all actually, of the in-pond treatment projects that were discussed, that were previously done, the Phragmites treatment, the aeration, the hydro raking, and potentially the alum treatment, were all CPA funded projects. The stormwater component of this project is actually in my wastewater management budget. So it's very important that we look at these two projects as complementary. We're trying to just by management address improvements in water quality, but as April said, it's very critical to maintain water quality in this freshwater system that we reduce the source of the nutrients. And such a large contribution is coming from Route 6. We thought the best way to advance this project was to spend some money to do a 25% construction design and then bring the partners in that actually are doing the contribution, meaning Mass DOT. So we have had earlier conversations with them, brought them to the site with actually some of our political leaders. Sarah Peak was involved in some of this conversation. Friends of the Pond, Sharon Shepley, actually was very critical in arranging that conversation, and others. I'm sorry if I'm leaving people out, but basically we thought it was in the best interest of the town to advance this work, to spend some money to develop a design. If we could get the community, and particularly the abutters who will be affected in allowing the easement, to agree, then we have a much stronger position, looking for grant funding, looking for state funding, looking wherever we can, and contributing perhaps through labor and resources of the town to make this project happen. So again, the Fisherman Landing site is a much smaller scope project, but I agree wholeheartedly with Rich and Gemma that this is a very valuable educational opportunity for us, that we are doing the best we can. It's very hard to protect our ponds, but everything we can do in terms of education and outreach is part of the solution to the problem. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Jane.
Any other questions about those three sites that we just talked about before we go back to some of the earlier questions?
This is Sharon Shipley. I just would like to say a huge debt of gratitude to Jane and Rich and Gemma and April and everybody who's put this together, because this has really been a long time coming. And I, for one, am very, very excited to see this and hope that we do have the opportunity to move forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sharon. And I think I see Moto G5. Were you waving to try and figure out how to unmute from your phone? I think if you go to the bottom, there you go.
I have a couple. I've got it. Yeah, I have a couple quick questions about the Fisherman's Landing. The choice to make the impervious cover to add the paving, did you look at other options in terms of what that might mean in terms of extra runoff?
Gemma, do you want to take that, or you would like me to do it?
Sure, I'll start. You can add in. So currently, there is already some impervious cover down there. It's actually buried under a lot of sediments. We couldn't see the full extent of the impervious cover. It's a mix of probably pavement and gravel. And so we are proposing to alter it slightly, but most importantly to regrade it, because right now the way that the runoff is coming down Fisherman's Landing Road, Park Street, it's kind of coming on both sides of the road, and you can see in the cracked pavement sort of where those channels are. So if we don't regrade that bottom parking lot, we're not going to be able to capture all of the stormwater runoff into our wet swale. So if we don't do it, unfortunately, we won't be able to make the most benefit out of that practice there.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question, and this is about the birds over on that side too. Is there any thought, this is, probably as much for Jane's overall plan, is there any thought or anyone working on that? Because that seems to be one of the bigger issues for the problems over in Schoolhouse Pond.
I am not working on the bird problem. I don't know if Shayna can address that issue if she's still with us.
I'm with you. Let's see here. Okay, I can't get my video to go, but anyway, so the cormorant issue, the Conservation Commission is very interested in that, as they've been roosting over the power lines at Little Depot Pond. So not this pond in particular, but they have been speaking with Eversource about the options for routing power lines to, help to improve the water quality there. So certainly that, the cormorants or whatever waterfowl or birds have been observed in this area, maybe that's something that they can consider as well. But because it doesn't have to do with power lines, the commission has not really looked at that pond in particular.
The other thing I could say to that, based on the past studies, even though kind of the budget suggested a larger portion from birds, most of the nutrients coming into these ponds is coming in from the upper end of the watershed through Minister's Pond and then down through Schoolhouse. So again, even though, from those numbers I showed, the most significant contribution they estimate is from birds into Schoolhouse Pond, most of it is, again, coming from the upper portion through Minister's Pond, which again is mostly stormwater runoff from roads, and then also, again, some septic contribution. So it is an important piece to think about, but it is much smaller portion of the contribution overall to these ponds and then downstream as well.
Okay, and thank you to everyone as well.
Thank you.
Not seeing any other questions. One of the earlier questions that we pushed back, any advice for homeowners doing similar plantings? One thing I'll say is, the Association of Preserve Cape Cod, we've been trying to promote what you can do with your own landscapes, including with our property office in Dennis. So not so much this year because of closures, but in the past we've done tours of our property, show what we've done with kind of using native plantings. We put in a small rain garden there. We have on our webpage, apcc.org, a video about how to do a rain garden. There's lots of tools online if you search rain gardens about how to size them and sources about native plants to put in them. We've done on a similar project to this with Horsley Witten, a nice brochure for homeowners on how to install rain gardens. And again, that is also available on our webpage at www.apcc.org. So that's a good resource. And again, I don't know, Horsley Witten, if you guys have other suggestions for homeowners who want to kind of do similar types of work on their property.
I think you mentioned it on the websites. There's an awful lot of information out there. I would cite the Rutgers University. If you just do a Google search, Gemma, you did find that recently, right? Rutgers has done a really nice they've done a number of rain garden installations, and they've put together a bunch of sizing information and guidance on how to do soil tests, how to do sizing of the facilities, and they wouldn't necessarily have the right plants to put in, but the other factors of rain garden design and installation would be really be easy to pull that off the web.
Yes, if you just search for Rutgers University Rain Garden Program, it will come up. And there's a homeowner's manual I think they put together.
And then a couple years ago, APCC with the town did a short kind of training, and it was, I think, recorded as well. Brian Kuchar from Horsley Witten came and presented looking at the library in Eastham.
Yes, we still
so
have
there's,
that.
Yeah, so that's another good resource. It's similar to some of the designs and examples that were talked about today, including, the system, for example, at the Sandwich Library. It looks very similar. It's in the parking lot area there. So the runoff from the parking lot goes to that space between and is treated. And there's other system kind of on the backside. So there's some videos that were created as part of that, which again, give you kind of a good sense of how these types of systems work.
And if we have a moment, I'll go back to Cheryl's earlier question about more general questions about how often we test for ponds and so forth. So if a pond has a semi-public or public beach, it's tested for bacteria weekly in the summertime. So that information is all on our website. We post every week. We link to Barnstable County Department of Health and Environment website, and they show the results as soon as they're available. So this year we test on Wednesday, so the results usually appear for the weekly testing on Friday. So you can keep track of actually all the towns on Cape Cod through that link. We also test for nutrient profiles in all of our major ponds, which is 10 ponds now, for nutrient profiles both in the spring with, actually this year we partnered with Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, and in the fall we work with the SMAS program and do the PALS program, as April mentioned, and we participate in that event as well. In years past, we've used all volunteers for this work. It's been very different this year with COVID. So I'm not sure what our volunteer testing program is going to be looking like. We are currently doing volunteer testing program of our estuary and through the MEP program profile. And we're doing that 5 times a year with volunteers. So we might be able to resume the volunteer testing program as well. But even if we have to contract out that work, we have a commitment to try to get that work done. So from another part of Cheryl's question, if I'm recalling this correctly, was how were the ponds prioritized? So back in 2011, we partnered with Ecologic. Liz Moran is a limnologist, and we asked her to evaluate all of our historic pond data and then work with the town to come up with sort of criteria to evaluate which ponds were most impaired based on a variety of criteria. And that's how we came up with Great Pond, Herring Pond, and then also in that highly impaired category were Schoolhouse and Museum Pond. We do go back on occasion and do a reassessment. The most recent one, reevaluating all of the pond water quality data, was actually done again by Liz Moran of Ecologic in January of 2019. So we do keep going back, looking at trends that we see, and we have spent a great deal of time evaluating Schoolhouse Ministers Pond because it's so complex. It's a shallow system, yet it has deep basins. It's not as easily managed than the larger deep ponds where alum is a pretty successful treatment option. So this one is more, I hate to say it, experimental, but I guess I'll use that word. We're just throwing everything we can at trying to be successful. And that is, I think those were the questions that you had.
I'm not seeing any other. Oh, go ahead. One more question.
I have a question about the alum treatment. My understanding from looking at various things is that alum can be used on Minister's Pond. And, you know, I've been swimming at that pond since 1977, and the condition of Minister's Pond now is just horrendous. I can hardly see my hand in front of my face, and no fish, no turtles, hardly any frogs, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm just interested in a quicker way to get this thing abated than something that's going to take 10, 15 years.
So when we presented remediation strategies to the Conservation Commission, we included the three approaches for their approval. And we did receive approval for alum treatment, but we're holding off on that approach. We are doing sediment testing. We're preparing ourselves so if the time comes and there is the need to do that or the decision to move forward with that, we have the approval. I will just highlight that alum treatment will not be throughout the entire pond. It is a very targeted treatment, and it's only in those stratified areas where there's, as April pointed out, there are the deep basins are very small in size, but they are stratified. So there would be a limited alum treatment only in those deep portions because of the constraints of using that approach. So this system is much more complex. There's no easy fix, and it does become an issue of how do you control the source, which is what the stormwater component will attempt to do, which is considerable from stormwater, and how do you try to hold the line using the management strategies, which it's management, it's not fixing the problem.
That's a very great point. And I think in other presentations, when I've talked about things like alum treatment, it can be a quick response, but it is a Band-Aid. The alum treatment won't last forever. I think in other large ponds, they've seen, 7-10 years later. And that's a decent amount of time, but the stormwater and reducing the source of the nutrients, source of the problem is going to be the long-term solution to kind of help. So.
Well, yeah, and I get that, but I was just wondering why they just can't be part of the same thing where they do the alum while they're working on the storm, which needs to be fixed, so that problem is taken care of. So you won't have to be doing the alum all the time, but kind of doing it, hit it from multiple approaches, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
And it's a possibility. We have the budget, we have the actual financial budget in hand to do that. But again, we're being very cautious and thorough in looking at all of the factors, and that's why we're doing such extensive monitoring we've done 2 vegetation surveys. We will continue to do that, continue the profiling of water quality, and also the sediment analysis, which all helps to have us, form a decision that's informed with all of the variables.
Okay. And as far as the hydro raking, I know you did an area between Schoolhouse and Ministers. And my understanding from my memory is there have been lily pads in between those 2 ponds for as long as I can remember, because I remember going fishing when I was a kid and having to row through lily pads to get over to Schoolhouse Pond. Is there any thought of hydro raking just not only there, but get out some more of those lily pads just around, I think it's really bad in Schoolhouse Pond. Is there any more thought of doing more extensive hydro raking?
Again, we had a very targeted permit approval from the Conservation Commission. There are other factors that we have to be concerned about, including protected species. So we hired a botanist who did 2 vegetation surveys for us and sort of cleared a narrow path which was, between those two basins for us to do the removal. And again, credit to our DPW department. We were under budget on that aspect because of their involvement. We removed 161 tons of material. It was unbelievable. And it was such a smooth running operation with no ill effects. So that is credit to the success of that effort. Can we go back? Can we perhaps extend the area? It's something that we will thoughtfully consider. But again, we are subject to constraints of approval, and there are other factors that are involved in such a fragile ecosystem such as this.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I appreciate all your efforts. I'm glad something's being done because it has been really disheartening to see how the pond has deteriorated over the years. So I'm glad stuff's being done. I'm just, of course, anxious to get it back to what I remember. But thank you.
All right, Jane, I think we're just past 4 o'clock. I don't see other questions. I don't know if we want to kind of wrap up at this point.
Yeah, as I said, thank you to my partners at Horsley Witten, APCC. I think they did an absolutely fantastic job for us. And I hope that if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, or I can actually get questions to both of them for you. I think the next step will be to perhaps send out a survey to the owners of Nauset Haven condominiums to see, to get a feel and feedback from that group, if they would be amenable to an easement. And our work team, our internal work team, are going to try to evaluate any comments you might have. So please send them forward. We again are going to see, what has community support, and we are really going to try very hard to do some improvements with this Route 6 runoff. It is not acceptable, and we'll do our best. So I'm going to try to make it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you all.